Hey guys, Stoltech Moto here doing another installation video on an FT-ECU active tune kit for a Yamaha MT-10. We've been selling these things for years. We really love them, as do our customers. Felt it was time to do a video here to explain some of the things that it's been doing, how it looks, how it gets hooked up on the bike, and what essentially you're getting. So for anybody who's been playing around with motorcycles for years knows that the fueling on a bike is one of the more critical aspects. That's going to control not only how much power you make, but it's going to have a huge impact over how smooth it is, your throttle response, and just about your overall enjoyment while you're on the bike. And as you change things like exhaust systems, intakes, filters, you're going to need corresponding adjustments to your fuel map. You could spend a lot of time doing this either on your own, on a dyno, with an operator, or you can have this kit. This kit is pretty slick in the sense that as long as the bike has been flashed with an FT-ECU software, either on the bench or the bike side, you can essentially plug this in, enable the software, and let it tune itself as you ride. Now, there are a few ways that you can play with this. You could do a manual data logging system, if you will, or you could just let it run full-time continuous mode and make changes. But what's great about it is that it's making changes in real time to all regions of the fuel map that you're running the bike. So basically, you're going to have your load base map in addition to your throttle position base map. This is going to allow adjustments to both sets of maps in real time. Other systems on the market don't allow that level of functionality. Furthermore, as you can see with this kit here, there's no piggybacks. There's no extra things to find a place on your bike for. You know, all these things add up space, and most of the time the ECUs are about the size of that box. So in this case, there's a lot less hardware. It's easier to install. It's easy to activate. It's very easy to work with, and it works in real time. So if you're after that last level of refinement, if you're looking for the most ultimate smooth throttle for that on throttle snatch that Yamahas are known for, even after they've been tuned a bit, this is the answer. This will get you about as close to a carbureted bike as you could possibly get without actually having to deal with the headache of a carburetor. So today we're going to do the installation, and we're going to show you what the video looks like as far as trying to set up the software. It's pretty straightforward once you do it. So we're going to be here today to explain that first step for you. Hopefully it makes sense. All right, so now first things first, you're going to want to take off the factory O2 sensor from the left-hand side of the bike. Very straightforward. Use an 18mm wrench, loosen it. The wires are routed up through these two clips here, behind the sprocket cover, and into this cover. One thing to note, the Active Tune Kit utilizes a different size sensor than the factory. The factory sensor is an M12 by 1.25. The Bosch is an M18 by 1.5. Most aftermarket exhaust systems and mid-pipes will include the threading for this larger size, and they'll include an adapter, which looks something along the lines of this, in order for you to run both setups. Factory setup obviously doesn't have an adapter, so you're going to need to do a little bit of welding if you want to retain the factory exhaust system. It'll work just fine if you do it, just an extra step to be planning for if you're going to be using the stock exhaust. All right, so the new wideband sensor is installed. Wires are routed through the factory clips. I'm going to run it behind the sprocket, and then you're going to plug the FT-ECU lambda controller into the factory connector for the O2 sensor. You're going to be left with this little piece of wiring here, which needs to be hidden. I'm not going to go over exactly where you could put that, but I would wire tie that up and I would put it underneath the tank, run it behind these hoses here, out of sight, out of mind. Once it's installed, you don't need to have access to these parts again. But that's essentially what the kit is. Pretty easy installation, doesn't get much quicker than that, provided that you have the right size bung on the exhaust. That's all there is to it. So now we'll get into what you need to do with the software to enable it. Okay, so with the hardware installed on a bike, we're going to use the software to configure the active tune. Now, I'm not going to go over every single feature of the software here. I'll let you play around with it, but I do want to cover some of the highlights and the areas that I think can make the most of an impact to a smooth running bike at the racetrack. So first and foremost, I want to draw your attention to the live correction mode. with the drop-down menu to either enable or disable. This is a very powerful feature. When this is enabled, it essentially means that there's full-time feedback from the wideband O2 sensor to the ECU. Changes are always being made. When that's disabled, however, you have a really powerful feature here in the sense that you can run the bike on the dyno, on the racetrack, or the road, data log to get proposed value changes, and then make those corrections back to your base map one at a time. Now the value here is that you can have kind of a course correction mode when you make big changes. New intake systems, new exhaust systems, if you took off the mid pipe, change your link pipe, anything with major changes, you can go in here, turn the system off, get proposed changes based on your run, and then make those adjustments back to the base map itself. Now this is powerful because the system, like any computing system, takes time to measure and process changes. So the larger those changes, the more time that it takes to make the requisite changes for your target or fuel ratio. So the smaller the change, the smoother the bike's going to become. So with trying to use this course correction mode, you can actually get your map really dialed in. Once you get it to a good point, which we'll show you, then you can turn on this live correction mode again, run the bike as normal, and it's going to make the small changes that are going to be required all the time. So what we're going to do here, we're going to show the AFR target values. This is kind of the brain behind everything. This shows as a function of the RPM and throttle position what the target air fuel ratio is. This is more or less the out-of-the-box configuration, which frankly we found works very well, makes good power, and it's very smooth. Minor changes, we do add a little bit of fuel down to this lower TPS value in the 0 and 1 columns. But other than that, this is the stock configuration out of the box from FlashTune. It works pretty well. You're obviously free to make changes here as you need to, but you should be forewarned. If you go too much either way, you're gonna have a poor running bike and you could potentially damage things. So keep that in mind as you go forward. Next, I want to show some of these activation limits, which I think are very powerful, right? So here you have the option of showing min and max speeds that you want to make the corrections between. These are just arbitrary in here now. Obviously, this bike doesn't rev to 16,000 RPM, but it basically just says that it's going to work all the way up to redline. For right now, we're arbitrarily working north of 4,100 RPMs. You could set this to any value that you want, but this is helpful because it lets you hone in on trouble spots as you're riding and tuning the bike. Same thing with the throttle position sensor. Here it's set for the full sweep from 0% to 100%, but you can make smaller increments if you need to. You can also do the same thing for engine coolant temperature. Here it's set for effectively just about every temperature range that you're going to encounter on the bike. But there again, if you wanted to work on a high temperature or cold temperature areas for the enrichment or your normal nominal steady state operation at the racetrack, as an example, you can fine tune things so that your changes are only made through these parameters. So these are kind of cool. It really gives you the ability to kind of activate this system only when and where you want it to. Furthermore, down here under the cylinder tuning, this is a pretty nice little touch too, because for where we showed today, the O2 sensor is kind of in the left bank and it's reading a mixture of 2 cylinders, right? And it's making those changes to all 4 cylinders. If you were looking for the ultimate in smoothness or power, you could conceivably weld a bung on each of the header pipes and then actively tune 1 cylinder at a time to get perfect tuning on each cylinder. So that obviously is very time consuming, but it is possible to do. With this value here set to 0, that's going to tune every cylinder a commensurate amount. But if you were to change that to 1, 2, 3, or 4, it would only make changes to cylinders 1, 2, 3, or 4 respectively. You also have the option over here, which most of the time you don't need to do unless there's a problem. But should you get a new sensor or change things, you can also perform the calibration as a function of the voltage coming out of that sensor. So there's a lot of functionality in here. It's a very powerful setup as long as you're using it correctly. So the next thing that we're going to show here would be kind of a time lapse showing how, when the bike is ridden, normally at the racetrack, on the road, on the dyno if you choose, using that live correction mode disabled, you can make your course correction. So we're going to show what this looks like. And basically, it's a very simple operation. All you need to do is leave the bike in the key on position when you turn it off. So use the kill switch, turn the engine off, leave the key on, hook up the harness to the bike, open up the software. You're going to go up here to device. It's grayed out now because we're not connected, but this fourth icon over here for active tune will be live. Click on that and it's going to open the monitor page, and you have the option of opening up and showing like effectively what you're pulling from the ECU, either in a live correction mode if you're on like an engine dyno, a chassis dyno, sorry, or you can pull the data back after you made your run. So we're going to show that next. Here's a time lapse of proposed TPS trim values that are made after riding on the road in the racetrack. As you can see, the values get smaller and smaller and only apply where the bike was ridden. And here's another time lapse of the map trim values showing proposed changes based on load. Again, this only makes changes where the bike is ridden, but gradually over time they will get smaller. Okay, now I want to spend just a bit going over this screen capture here. This is one of the ones that were just shown in that time lapse, but I wanted to show a couple things. This is what you're going to see when you come back from your run off the dyno or the racetrack. Before you key off the bike, just turn the engine off with the kill switch, leave the key on, plug up your harness to the ECU, run the software, and then open the active tune monitor. This is what you're going to see. There's going to be two tabs here. There's going to be one for your TPS and one for map. So the first one on TPS is going to be the corrections that are only based on a combination of your throttle position sensor and the engine speed, the RPM. The map value is going to be the RPM, but load, right? And you can think of your load changes. It really doesn't matter what your RPM is. If you're on flat ground at 5,000 RPM, there's a particular load. If you're going up the hill at the same speed at 5,000 RPM, you're going to need more throttle. That's a higher load, and you're going to need fueling to change to account for that load. So these two tables are very powerful. This is an example where the current stuff from the Power Commander doesn't have the ability to adjust load base. So this is definitely a strong feature for the active tune. So that's a very powerful piece here that I wanted to draw your attention to. But specifically, I want to show some of these colors here. So what you see, this is a change that was made, near the end of several runs. So the values have gotten smaller. But what you're going to see here are a bunch of numbers. Anything with a 0 are either some regions that the bike was not run in, or they're areas that the system is not proposing a change. So you can call those good or either not used. Now the small values, your 1s, your 2s, your 3s, positive or negative, those essentially at this point mean things are good, right? Those are not actual trim value changes, they're a percentage change. So anything in those like single digit range, like low single digits, you're good to go. You don't need to chase every single last one. They don't have to make this all look like zeros. If you get it down into the 1s, 2s, and 3s, you're in a very good place for power and smoothness. Now those really dark reds and oranges, those are the areas where it's proposing fuel be added to the bike. The dark blues and lighter blues are areas where fuel is proposed to be removed. So positive or negative, fuel is either going or coming. These are the areas that you definitely want to focus in on, right? So all these other light green areas, very light yellow areas, those are essentially good for operation. If you were to put this thing back into this live correction mode enabled, it would work very well, be very smooth. You wouldn't even know that it's running. But these bright areas with these big values, those are the ones that you want to work yourself around, right? And the more time you spend with it, the better it's going to get. And you could use those limit values that I showed you earlier to kind of hone in on the regions that make sense. So for the purposes of what we're doing here, normally speaking, this 0 to 10% throttle range, that's going to be light throttle. So that's your on, off, on throttle area. You're going to use that as you're leaving a stop sign in traffic. You're going to be kind of roaming through this region. Normal riding in the mountains on the racetrack, you're going to be, 15% through 100%. The MT-10 obviously has a lot of power, so probably not going to be using 50, 60, 70 and above all the time, but you'll get there occasionally. So most of your riding is going to be spent in the middle. So where we are today in that 15% throttle position through, 50, 60, 70%, this is pretty good. This reflects something that'll be very smooth for the racetrack, very smooth for the canyons when you're trail braking to the apex and you want to have nice smooth throttle roll on. So you're going to be kind of chasing these values at this point, trying to get them right. The more time you spend, as I mentioned, the better the product's going to go. But the bottom line is, if you use this product correctly, really making use of both that live correction mode once you're dialed in, but also disabling that to do the course correction, that's really where the value is for this product. We've had a lot of success with this over the years, a lot of happy customers, but if you just plug and play, you're missing out on a lot of the feature here. So practice with this. If you have any questions, if you have any problems, feel free to reach out. We're very happy to help. As always, ride safe. We're here when you need us.